Subtle results, still you, but with fewer lines. Botox Cosmetic, out of botulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
Hey, Ollie.
Hey, Dave.
What is going on today on the What Difference Does It Make podcast? What is going on today in general, I guess? Usually I ask for yourself. What's happening today?
Well, I am going to tell you about myself.
Okay.
Usually I like to talk in generalities, but today I'm going to tell you, I'm going to admit that today's guest I've become a little bit emotional about.
Emotional? Why so?
We're talking to Robert Hilburn today. We grew up reading Robert Hilburn's reviews in the LA Times reviews. He was the music critic, music editor. He influenced us a lot, whether we agreed with him or disagreed with him. But we are talking to him today because he wrote a biography on Randy Newman, who I came to learn about through my parents and who are now both gone, sadly. And so we get to talk to Robert Hilburn about Randy Newman. So that's just like a convergence of emotion for me. And how are you? Top that, Dave.
And I can't. Although I'll probably allude to a lot of times in this interview, my musical taste, which I didn't have any when I was in my early teens. I didn't know what was good, what was bad. But I had the LA Times that arrived on my driveway every morning. And I went out in my jammies and picked it up and went to the calendar section and read about music, and it was always Robert Hilburn a lot of times, and he would tell me about these bands, and he would say what was good and what was bad. They had negative reviews back then, and so I knew to stay away from bands like Journey and Rush, and so I never listened to them ever and never enjoyed their music, thanks to Robert. But I will...
Dave, you're going to have to edit that out.
I will, but... Well, but just a few words in defense of our country. I just want to tell you that this Randy Newman book is really great. And we're going to talk a lot about that. Robert is a music fan, and I can't wait to get into it with him because I feel like I kind of know him in a way. Even though it was a one-way conversation, like he would tell me things, I would nod my head, go, okay, Robert Hilburn, and then go out and search out the latest in music that he was into. Kind of exciting to get him here in the garage. We're doing this live.
For a three-way conversation, not just a one-way conversation. Yeah. And he's here. He's live and in person because he is a Valley boy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Valley man.
I think because he is a journalist, he knows the importance of actually having some face-to-face time and talking to the person instead of through a screen. So I am so very happy that Robert is here with us, and we're going to talk to him about his book, A Few Words in Defense of Our Country, the biography of Randy Newman. Yeah, all that went into it. And what goes into social media, Holly? What happens on our social media pages?
Kind of a lot goes into social media. I guess maybe it ebbs and flows. But you can please check us out on social media at WDDIM Podcast and on our YouTube channel where you can find clips of our past interviews and some of this with Robert Hilburn. So please check it out.
All right. So we're very excited to have him in here. Let's get into our talk with Robert Hilburn. He wrote a book about Randy Newman. Maybe we'll talk about Randy Newman. Who knows? We'll talk about a lot of things.
We'll see where it goes.
Yes. On the What Difference Does It Make podcast.
Okay.
All good?
Good afternoon, and we're living here in lovely Sherman Oaks.
Yeah.
Valley Glen is, what is it? Sherman Oaks.
This is
Sherman Oaks technically, right?
When
And also speaking of the Valley, you're a fellow Matador. You went to CSUN as well.
I was the first graduating class from the school, editor of the school paper, thank you, student body president, thank you. But it was a small school. It was like 5,000.
Was it Valley State College back then?
It was generally called that. It was San Fernando Valley State College, Northridge, I guess that was so Valley State was the...
San Fernando Valley State College, that's what it was.
Okay.
At Northridge.
Before or after.
Go State.
Now it's university, thank you.
Yep. We're both.
Oh, and I read a thing, they got an alumni thing saying it was Forbes named it the second best public institution in California. I don't know how they rank this. I mean, Caltech, have they heard of these things? But it's nice to think that.
We'll take it. And
we're proud.
And you're still working there.
Yeah. Well, I do it. I volunteer. Yes, I do it just because it's a fun thing to do, Because you get to pick, the fun thing is picking out the songs you play.
Right, yeah. So it's like the Bob Dylan Fun Time theme hour. You pick a theme and you go with it.
I pretended as if pop music had not changed. And it was still the kind of music we listened to in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Kind of singer-songwriter, rock and roll, that kind of stuff. So that's my theme. I mean, and it's fun to do it, but I can't do it live because I can't edit myself. I don't know how you do it, because don't you say things sometimes you got to say, whoa, and it's not, you shouldn't have said that. And so I write it out and I do it into an iPhone and send it in.
Yeah. Oh, and let everyone else do the work. Yeah, that's a good way to do it.
I'm afraid I'll say something I shouldn't have said. This something that's private, something that's objectionable to people. So I don't think ahead. I just say it. But once I left the paper, I've not kept up with music as much as I do. One, because of the years, it doesn't sound quite right. And secondly, I'm writing books, and I'll listen to a few records. I mean, I don't get them all anymore. At the times, you got like 1,000 records a month, and here, you don't get them, so you have to buy them, and you have to pick. Well, how do I know which ones to buy? And I read reviews sometimes, and I get it, and I don't like it at all. So unless something really strikes me as a high percentage, but my favorite artist, my gosh, since I left the paper, is Billie Eilish.
Is that right?
I mean, I can't believe how good she is. If she had been back then, in the day, I've been writing about her as much as I've been writing about anybody I liked. I think, she was 19 when she made her first album. I was like, poor girl, how's she going to get through the era of social networking and fashion and all this stuff? It's a spectacle of making yourself part of your sales pitch, which Taylor Swift does, and they all do. It's just part of the game these days. And I think she just avoids it. She doesn't, go to all the parties. She's just like a human person. She's making 3 albums, won 3 Oscars, I think, 2 Oscars. She's fabulous. I mean, and the music is just like the singer-songwriters I used to like. That's kind of disappeared. Songwriting, there's people who do singer-songwriting in a great way, but it's not what people want to hear. Like Jason Isbell is terrific, but he's not particularly well known, I mean, he sells records, but I mean, he would have been like a very minor salesperson back in the day. I used to do a lot of website things. I would write things on there, my favorite this, my favorite that. Mm-hmm. And I realized I was only listening maybe 20 albums a year. So I didn't want to leave out somebody who was fantastic, There were other people, Florence and the Machine. There's, again, there's lots of people I've liked. Kendrick Lamar, my God, I would have written about him in those days. But Billie Eilish is the one that is my style of music, the singer-songwriter.
Okay, you said you read reviews. Who would you run out and buy based on a review you read?
I don't read much because the whole impact of reviewers has been at publications has been terribly undercut. Because back in the day, let's say 1975, if you wanted to know what Bruce Springsteen's concert was like, you'd have to wait 2 days to get the LA Times and read a review, because and newspapers around the country the same way. Now there are 1,000 reviews on the website within 10 minutes after that show's over. So, and so you don't need the turn to the page. You don't have to wait 2 days to get something. So I think the authority, the influence, all that stuff of critics has been really hurt by the internet and stuff.
Yeah. We are an 80s podcast. We started out in I discovered you in 1980, I believe. I wouldn't have discovered X or I think the Pretenders came out in 80 and like all these bands. And I I'm early teens, and we get the paper, and I start reading this stuff, and like, okay, maybe this is the guy that this is
nice.
what I need to follow.
Nice. But and every time you mention something, it reminds me of a story. The Pretenders. The great thing about the job, one of the great things was, other things, you get to interview Bob Dylan. I interviewed Bob maybe 8 or 10 times, probably as much as anybody ever did. And I went with him to Jerusalem. I was the only person. I went with him to do an interview after the Born Again Christian album. I went with him to do an interview in Amsterdam that lasted 9 hours over 2 days. I mean, can you imagine that?
Yeah.
There's nothing more. I mean, part of the reason you do this, you love music and you love artists, you love to learn about them and stuff. And that was 9 hours of Bob Dylan, where he's telling me his whole creative process. Mojo, which is a great English music journal, by far better than Rolling Stone. It said that was the best interview Dylan ever did, but to be able to sit there and do it, can you imagine? But the Pretender story is the paper would send me to England. England was such a breeding ground for music. So in the 80s, probably late 70s to the 90s, I would go to London for at least a week every year. Can you imagine? So one of those trips in 1980, I think, I'm walking along Carnaby, is that the street? So I'm walking along Carnaby Street, and I hear this record from a store coming out, and I say, that's awfully good. And I turn around and walk in there, and I say, whose record is that? And they say, I don't know. Radio, it's one of these. It's
on BBC or
BBC
something.
Radio.
It's just that they turn it on. And so I go to the local record store and say, I just heard a record. It's a girl singer, and it seems like it was Brass in Pocket or something like that. And she says, oh, that's the Pretenders. And it had just come out. So I took it home with me to L.A. and wrote a review as soon as I got home.
Insane.
I mean, just discovering like that. But it was like that in the...
That never happens. I can't do that.
But in the 70s and 80s particularly, that's the way it happened. There was so much music going on. You'd walk out on Sunset Boulevard and bump into somebody, a star or a new person. Elvis Costello would be one week, or the Talking Heads would be another week. There was so much talent, It's just incredible, that 70s and 80s. And again, I think it started waning a bit. My kind of music started waning in the 90s. Nirvana, the White Stripes, and then Arcade Fire, say in 2000. That was maybe my last three loves of rock and roll, because hip-hop took over. And hip-hop was incredible. I loved NWA, I loved Public Enemy, I loved Eminem, and now Kendrick Lamar is in that great class, The thing about hip-hop, it's not my life they're talking about.
Yeah.
The way Lennon talked about my life, or Springsteen talks about my life, or Dylan talks about my life. It's a different experience. So I admire those artists I mentioned. It's great, but it's not. I love that singer-songwriter who talked about, what's going on in his life, what's going on in the world, in a way that was easy to listen to and understand. And Joni Mitchell, and that was my golden period. And the fantastic thing, it lasted so long. I mean, I think some of these Dixieland might last a couple of years. I don't think, dance, swing and stuff lasted a couple of years. Rock and roll lasted from 55 to, let's say, 2005, to be generous, maybe 2000. And that's a long time. There's still rock and roll bands out there, but in a sad way to say, the pop audience doesn't care. They want other things. They may think it's pretentious for someone trying to tell them what their life's about. They want to know, they want to celebrate, they want to dance, they want to be angry, whatever it is, they're not interested in the singer-songwriter. And I knew that as soon as I saw American Idol. I said, when that show comes on, all you need to do is come on and sing. You don't have to write. You can go do an old Motown song. That's fine. So you sensed that things were changing. And then the internet, Spotify and all that kind of stuff. You don't have the album. You don't treasure it. You don't hold on to it. You don't read the liner notes. So it seems like it's a different world, and it's a different generation. So God bless, but it's just a different.
The Pretender story is interesting, though, because it was the sound that drew you in.
No, the voice.
Oh, the voice.
Her voice. That's what who is that singing?
So it was instantly the voice. What draws you in initially? I mean, you say singer-songwriter. I mean, Hero Time I heard, you kept writing about Springsteen, and I remember buying The River was the first album I bought, and I listened to it like, okay, well, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. He's my favorite artist now. But the first time, like, oh, this is kind of a gruff voice. It wasn't like a melodic type voice that I was like instantly like.
What you like, it changes over the years. As you get older, I mean, I can understand, I read an email somewhere or a Twitter or something, an English professor at a college in New York. He was always talk about Dylan. And some student raised their hand one day and said, I've never heard of Bob Dylan. Could you bring a record in and let us hear it? And so he brought in Like a Rolling Stone. He plays it, and they all laugh. Yeah. What is this? It's like a Model T. The sound is so foreign to him. It hasn't got the synthesizer. It hasn't got all this kind of stuff. It's just a different audience today, and you have to respect that. I'm not putting down what people like today at all, because again, Kendrick Lamar, Billie Eilish, there's some great artists. But again, it's a smaller world to me. Your musical tastes change, why you like things. I guess the first thing you listen to is the sound of it and the vocal, because that's what you hear first. Is that pleasing? And then you get the theme comes in late. But the theme ultimately to me is the most important.
We'll talk about Randy Newman eventually. But were you at, like, Stevie Wonder was also an opening band for, who I think you should write about next. But that's, I don't know.
I have wanted to, but he's impossible to deal with because he's in a different world. He's in a studio. You can't get to him. You have to go through people. Doing an interview with him, he would routinely be 3 hours late because he's in the studio. He's in a different world. I mean, I love him. I love, he's my... top 5-6 artists ever. You'd ask him, what day is today, Stevie? And he'd start talking about all kinds of things, 10, 15 minutes. Oh, it's Monday, And so transcribing that, you have to transcribe, it'd be a 3-hour interview and you get 20 minutes to use stuff. You have to go through all that stuff. And God bless him, he's so great. But anyway, he was planning to do his own. And everybody's planning to do their own, and almost no one ever do it because it's hard. It takes a lot of time. But I certainly think it's a great story. I wish I could do it.
It seems like Stevie and Bob Dylan would be the same thing. Like, what time is it, Bob? Like, whoa, let me tell you which way the wind blows.
If Bob's in the right, comfortable, he's just like us.
Really?
Just like us. Some days he's not he's thinking of his songs. He's thinking of other things. He doesn't like doing interviews if he's plugging the album. He feels like he's a huckster. But if you get him in the right mood with a thing he likes talking about, the whole point of this thing was it was a 5,000-word story about the creative process. It was a series I did. Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, Merle Haggard, Lucinda Williams, Ice Cube. I think it might have been other people. But see, I'm not talking to you, Bob, about your family life, drugs. I just want to talk to you about the creative process. So I go into this room in Amsterdam, and I'm not on the way over. I'm just nervous because is he going to be in the good Bob Dylan mood or the distracted Bob Dylan mood? He's not that he's nasty, but he's got other things in his mind. He's not particularly a good day to be talking to him. So we sit down. So how long is he going to do today? How open is he going to be? And so we sit down. I go in the room. He's got his guitar in his hand. He's got coffee and cookies on the table. So he talks for an hour. Great. About how he wanted to start writing, how he did this and that, and how he started studying. He reads all the books in poetry he can. You've got to say something in a song that makes somebody stop and think and turn their head, or it's worthless. On and on and on. And after an hour, there's a knock on the door, and that's usually the thing that rock stars do to give them an out. If the interview's not, so the guy puts his, okay, Mr. Dylan, it's an hour, and he says, give us another hour. Oh, my heart, this is the greatest thing. And then an hour later, there's a knock on the door, and Dylan doesn't even answer the door. He says, we're okay for the night. We keep talking and keep talking. And I've got everything I could ever want. And we get up at the end of the evening. He says, now, are you seeing the show tomorrow? And I said, oh, yes. Well, why don't we get together again in case there's anything you forgot or anything puzzling, and we can talk more. Can you believe that?
Oh, my God. Randy Newman says it's money that matters. So maybe we should take a break, play some ads, earn a few shekels, and then move on. So we will be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. The holidays are here, and you know what that means. It's time to get your friends and family the gifts they deserve. Take the stress out of shopping with Amazon's great deals and low prices on a huge range of items from toys to tech and much more. Whoever you're gifting for, Amazon has great prices on everything you need this holiday season. Shop Black Friday week starting November 21st.
The holiday season officially starts when you get that first card in the mail. Shutterfly makes it easy to add more meaning to the everyday with hundreds of holiday card designs that can be personalized in seconds with your favorite photos from this year. Select your greeting, customize the color, and even add little extras like personalized foil to make a holiday card that really shines. Enjoy 40% off with code SMILE40 at Shutterfly.com and send something meaningful this year. See site for more details.
Gift the remarkable with Marc Jacobs fragrances this holiday season. From the iconic Daisy and Perfect to the all-new Daisy Wild, Marc Jacobs perfume gift sets include everything she needs to feel special. From her favorite fragrance, plus the matching travel spray, holiday gifts don't get much more perfect than this. So if you're looking for a gift inspiration these holidays, gift the remarkable with Marc Jacobs.
And we're back on the What Difference Does It Make podcast with our guest, Robert Hilburn.
Bob Dylan, you got him to do a quote.
Yeah. The great thing was I realized that he's not Johnny Cash and Paul Simon, the guys I wrote about, the first biographies.
Yeah.
He's not that well known. You know, he never sold that much, comparatively speaking, and people only know him by 3 or 4 songs. You Got a Friend in Me, Short People, I Love L.A. Beyond that, ask the average person, they don't know anything about Randy Newman, okay? And to me, it's all the other stuff he wrote that's important. Those are nice songs, but they're not the heart of his legacy. The heart of his legacy is the 75 or so songs he wrote about what he sees as the shortcomings in the American character: racism, greed, sexism, immigration. I mean, all the things that we're talking about today. And he's been writing about that for 50 years. And that's why he's great. That's why I wanted to write the book. I wouldn't have written the book if he had just written Short People. I mean, so what? You know, but those other songs are incredible. They're important. He's as good as Simon and Dylan. He's on the same level as they are, and people need to know that and listen to his message. All those things, to me, added up to a great book. It was a fight, because how are you going to convince somebody? You write a book. How are you going to convince a reader to listen to this person who they've never really heard? And so I sent an email to 8 to 10 or 12 of people I respected and asked them to write 100 to 200 word testimonial. Why do you like Randy Newman? Why should people listen to him? And the first person I got response from was Dylan.
Oh my God.
I mean, and he almost never does that kind of thing, but it shows the respect. Yeah. Then a couple days later, Paul Simon checks in. Yeah. Again, you can't have a better songwriter say that, because those guys, I mean, Simon is like Newman. He writes the music and the words. Great music, better than 99% of pop artists. Most of them use 2 or 3 chords. Dylan says, I'm not a musician. I don't write music. I'm a wordsmith. Mm-hmm. He takes old folk songs and kind of reworks them in his head. And Joni Mitchell's in that class, and Stevie Wonder's in that class, but there's very few that do, but none of them do it like Randy does, because he went to UCLA for 4 years to study music composition. His uncles were the kings of film score, so he grew up with classical music and knows all of those chords and all of those things, and he's a great arranger. But again, to me, it's the themes that matter most.
Mm-hmm. To add to the list of people who you got to talk about in the testimonials, Don Henley.
Yeah, Don Henley is so elegant. I mean, Linda Ronstadt, Jackson Brown, Thomas Friedman, the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times op-ed columnist, Creole Marcus, Bob Christgau, top-level critics, because they all respect him. And I thought by reading that, it might convince a reader to listen to him.
Yeah. Most rock guys say all you need is 3 chords and the truth.
Yeah, that's great.
Randy's not telling the truth. You, in your book, you're talking about the unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 3 chords, and I'm telling my story, but this might not be the way.
And 3 chords and the truth is all you need from you too. Probably is 3 chords and the truth. Dylan's that way. I mean, David Bowie's probably that. I mean, great artists you can do it, but look how much more you can get if you know the whole if you know what a symphony orchestra can add, and you just take, all you need to take is 30 seconds of it, but if you put it in the right place, it lifts, Sail Away, it just lifts that song so much more. Louisiana, 1927, it adds an emotional texture to it that is just remarkable. The first time I saw Randy, I was a freelance writer at the Times. I'll tell you, I had never written a review before I went to the Times and asked if I could write about rock and roll. I'd never written, but the entertainment editor there knew one of his friends was the news bureau chief of the Time magazine. He had been my editor before in a newspaper, and when the entertainment editor, Charles Chaplin, called Ed Goodpaster, he said, this guy, he gave him enough of a recommendation. The idea, does he know about music, never came up. But he took a chance, and I did some freelance stories, and I was confident. I loved music so much. And I had been a newspaper reporter before, so I just didn't have any hesitancy about doing it, even though I look back at it now, what a chance that guy took. But again, it was a freelance thing for a while. So that was 1966. I started doing the freelance stuff. And then January of 1980, the big thing for me every week was the Troubadour Folk Club in West Hollywood. Every Tuesday night, they would have a new singer-songwriter, Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, Neil Diamond. I go there on the Tuesday night in the industry. A lot of industry people are there. A lot of critics are there. And a few people buying customers are there. And it's Randy Newman. And I had not heard his first album very much, which was a great album, because I was covering more country and folk things for the Times. So this was my introduction to him. It was the second album, 12 songs, and they were so good, these songs. His voice was so good. I just didn't quite know what was going on, though, because there was no guitar. This isn't really rock and roll. It's not even folk music. What is this? It was a kind of a variation of the blues, but he sang Love Story and Davy the Fat Boy, and it was just incredible. And I wrote this really good review saying watching him work on the blues tradition is what it must have been like in the 60s in the Village watching Dylan work on the folk tradition. That was, when I read that back the other day, that's pretty impressive. But nothing particularly happened. He didn't get any radio airplay. Then I got hired full time, and the first review I wrote, I think, was the Troubadour. Linda Ronstadt was the headliner. The opening act comes out. And can you imagine having an opening act come out and sing these 4 songs? Sunday Morning Coming Down, Me and Bobby McGee, Help Me Make It Through the Night, and For the Good Times. Chris Christopherson. I said, this is like Hank Williams has come back. I didn't write about Linda. I wrote about Chris because I'd already written about Linda, and I just said, this guy is so phenomenal. This was his first U.S. concert appearance outside of Nashville. He was just incredible. So I fell in love with Chris. I started dressing like Chris. I wore these faded denim clothes.
It's a good look.
Then 2 months later, and I'm getting around to your guy.
Don't worry, it's okay.
2 months later, a guy from England makes his debut at the Troubadour. First U.S. appearance. Comes out. There's no guitar, I don't think. But he's at the piano. He doesn't seem to have much stage presence. He looks hesitant, but he starts playing these songs, Your Song and Country Comfort and 60 Years On, and it's Elton John. And I write this review saying he's going to be the biggest star in pop music. And the reason it was such a big, and every time he comes to L.A., he thanks me from the stage. Yeah. And the reason is the record company was ready. See, they were waiting for something like this, and they sent it to every critic in the country, every radio station in the country. They really took advantage, and that's what vaulted him. See, with Randy, he hadn't toured yet. See, it was just beginning. Warner Brothers didn't really know what to do with him, but Elton did. And after that show, it was so much attention I got. I've been there 2 months now, full time. I said, well, look, I got to be careful. I've got to find somebody who's really great because I can't do this every month. Right. The great new artist. I waited a year and a half. I passed on Cat Stevens. I passed on a whole bunch of people until this guy came up on stage. I heard his record. Chris sent me the record. I listened to it 4 times the first night. By the next day, I was quoting the lyrics to everybody in the paper I could meet. And it was John Prine, and now John didn't become the big star like Elton, but I did a whole page in Sunday Calendar saying how great he was, and I learned you can't always predict sales, but you can usually have a good about the talent. Talent's an easier thing to predict future than sales. And look at the great career he's had. I just love John. And everybody loves Dylan loves Brian. Randy loves Brian. Everybody loves Brian.
It's such a giant leap to say he's going to be a huge, huge star. The editors must have come up to you and say, do you really want to say this?
No, they were the greatest. They never questioned anything I wrote. They encouraged it, and it started off, Dave, pop music was so unimportant in 1970 to all newspapers, most all newspapers. I think the New York Times had a full-time critic. Almost nobody else did. When the Beatles played the Hollywood Bowl, the LA Times sent a teenager to cover it because they thought that's all they cared about him, okay?
Right, yeah.
So what happened was, all of a sudden, I think one of the reasons they hired me was Woodstock. All of a sudden you see 500,000 people. Well, this is interesting. The front page of the New York Times. Maybe we got to start thinking about this. So they hired me. Gradually, we went from like an 8-inch story a week to a column a week to Sunday, just a small thing, to where we had a page in calendar and 2 pages in calendar, then 10 pages. They just let it grow so great because this became the heart of the music business. It took over from New York. Mm-hmm. So it was a great, great time for me to go to that paper and, get the job and be given the freedom going to London all those years. And so, no, they never said, do you really need to, they really trusted. Yeah.
You would never read about something like that today. Can you imagine someone doing a review? This is the greatest movie of all time. Or I don't know, like Billie Eilish. I don't think she had someone to say this is one article that was like this is.
Well, the reason I think the New York Times did a full page on her. Some magazine did. I saw all of a sudden 3 big stories on Billie Eilish. So that's when I checked her out.
Yeah, but that makes you make notice of her. But it's not someone. It wasn't like this is. Because
it's dangerous.
It is. That's why I'm saying to you, like that was dangerous. You're willing to jump, leap, and not look the fool.
I always hoped that everybody I really loved, I could help. I wanted other people to hear it, and a lot of times they didn't follow through. Some people, they don't know who John Prine is, never heard his music, but he's so respected. But there's other people that I liked a lot that didn't get the sales or the respect. It just kind of, and it's hard. That's at a record company. You sign somebody based sometime on a couple songs. You make an album. It might be a good album, but that's all they got. You don't know their motivation. You don't know their drive. They get caught up in drugs. They get caught up in fame. They keep that focus and make great music is really hard.
Well, bringing it back to Randy Newman, the few labels that he's been on kept him even with sales that weren't through the roof.
Yeah, well his first album sells 5,000.
Yeah.
Okay, it was a terrific album, got in huge critical attention, didn't sell anything. And he's got a lot of insecurity because his uncles said it's a fluke what they were doing. Randy's father wanted to be a composer. They said, no, you go be a doctor. We got too many families. We can't put more of the family
can't go into the family business.
So he had a lot of confusion, insecurity. He inherited nature or nurture. He inherited, just as he inherited that musical side of him, the insecurity. He got insecurity and perfectionism, which made songwriting torturous. I can't do this. It's hard because I want it to be perfect. So he shut down. He didn't go back in the studio for months, 8 months, 10 months. And Lenny Waronker, his best friend and his mentor and the person who's indispensable in his life, would go over once in a while and say, well, Randy, come on. And he says, Lenny, nobody cares. Nobody cares. And so Lenny finally talks him into going back in the studio. He makes a more radio-friendly album, gets a lot of attention, reviews, and again, 5,000 sales. Mm-hmm. So he shuts down, another several months before he goes back. And then he makes a live album, and it gets some attention somehow, So
it's weird.
Looks like a bootleg.
Yeah, because this is the cover, the titles.
I love this story. I think this was such a brilliant marketing.
Well, yeah, and it was a guy named Chris Krasnow. That same year, Dylan's, that great White Wonder, is that what it's called? The Great White Wonder? It was the first big bootleg, okay? And so it was a mystery about it. My God, we're getting these Bob Dylan songs. The record company hasn't even released them. This is incredible. So he said, let's do this live show. We'll release it as a bootleg. So to try to go on to that same thing. And what happened was they sent copies of this to disc jockeys and critics. This isn't meant for release, but we wanted to share this with you. And Rolling Stone wrote something saying, what do you mean you're not releasing this? You've got to release this. And so that's what they were waiting for. So bowing to pressure, quotes, they put it out. And people were caught up enough in the bootleg and the reviews and stuff. It sells 50,000, and he gives him confidence for the first time. He'll get insecure again, but he gives him a bit of confidence, and he does the Sail Away album. And that was planting his flag in the thing. He had decided by that time, I want to write significant songs that mean something and tell about our country. And that's the unique vision. I mean, he is told no other songwriter I've heard, including Dylan, has spoken as directly to these times as Newman. And that's remarkable. And after he did Sail Away, which was a song about slave trading, it was about a slave trader going to Africa and trying to convince young African men to come to the promised land. It's freedom. It's great. Then he says, well, I want to write more about race. That's a big subject. And if I can read you this.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is something that summarizes his writing as much as anything I say or he says. I've always gone against two things that sell 90% of the records in America. It's kind of like I came across a fork in the highway and took another road, away from how the medium had been used for 1,000 years. I don't write love songs, and I don't write in the first person. It's not what interests me. The songs... This is his social commentary. The songs are about things that need to be noticed, places like ghettos and slum that should shame everyone. It hurts to see people living like that in this rich country, where the fact that one zip code entitles you to better medical care and the wrong zip code can be a death sentence. So that's the seriousness, the darkness. He puts humor in his music, but there's this dark undercurrent, and that's what drives him. And he felt after Sail Away, he felt the confidence. He writes Rednecks, which is maybe the most savage protest song ever released by a major record label. And after that, he says, okay, that was fine, but now I want to talk more about it. I want to try to understand the culture behind our races, what contributes to that. So he does this concept album, Good Old Boys, which is a masterpiece. So it's selling 200, 300,000, 400,000. Critics are going crazy, and he's doing tours and smaller places, things like that. But it's not taking the world by fire. I mean, he would be selling, let's say the first week, his album, he might sell 20,000. James Taylor would sell 400,000 that week. Yeah. Fleetwood Mac would sell 2 million, I mean, it goes on. So he was always under sales and underappreciated by the general public. And the reason is, one main reason is radio never played these songs. All the songs I'm talking about that are his most important were either too controversial, too complex, they weren't catchy enough. Radio just ignored them. And the important thing about that was he could see after Rednecks that radio wasn't ever going to play him. So he could have changed. He could go back to writing songs more like You've Got a Friend in Me, which he wrote. Really nice, pleasant songs, short, people, funny. But he was willing to sacrifice all that sales to keep doing what he wanted to do.
He did hide musically, it's gorgeous. And you don't note it, like in Sail Away. I heard it initially, and you hear it, it's like, what a great melody, what a great tune. It wasn't until hearing it a few times, and then wait a second, what's going on here?
Yeah.
It's like the message is hidden.
That's a crucial point, because one of the things what was complex is the radio didn't know who was singing here. Is Randy Newman singing? Is he a redneck? And so if I can take the break and tell how that happened, he was first writing songs just trying to get on the radio like every other songwriter does. And then he says, I'm tired. I want to start writing songs that mean something to me. And the first pop standard he wrote, and the first song that really meant something, was I Think It's Gonna Rain Today. And the funny thing, that's been recorded by 200 artists, I think. Dusty Springfield, Ella Fitzgerald, I think. I mean, just a great Peter Gabriel. It's a great list of people. Randy would put it down after he wrote it. He said, it's like a folk song. It's too soft. It's too sentimental. It's sophomoric. And Randy, it's very difficult to get him to talk about his personal life and sometimes his deepest feelings, because his uncles had always said, don't ever tell people about yourself. He says, I'm talking about Alfred Newman and Lionel Newman. They would work with these big Hollywood stars. These actors are all jerks. They come in bragging about their new contract, bragging about this. Don't brag, Randy. Don't brag. Don't tell people about yourself either, because they can use that against you. Just let your music speak for it, okay? Yeah. So when I start writing he's fine when we're talking about the songs, though he doesn't want to go too deep into the personal connection. But when we start talking about his personal life, in fact, he was born cross-eyed. He was bullied in school. He would walk backwards in the classroom so people wouldn't see him so much. He was the terrible intimidation of being expected to follow in the footsteps of Alfred Newman. It terrified him. He didn't feel like he was getting a lot of support. His father was not all that he hoped he would be. And so Lenny Waronker, his friend, says, why don't you forget classical music and come over and do pop music? And that was great because he said, it wasn't that pop music was easier to me, but it was, I would have somebody always by my side who was saying, this is great. Lenny is my spine. He's my backbone. He's my everything, my courage. That's continued. They're still best of friends. He told me in this interview, he says, I think the reason I don't like the song is it's too close to me. It tells too much about me. And that's his personality. He's very insecure. He tends to be depressed a lot. A friend who knows him says, I wake up in the beautiful Southern California sunshine. It's going to be a great day. Randy wakes up, sees the same sunshine and says, I think it's going to rain today. He doesn't want to go downstairs. He just soon stay in a lit den watching television. Doesn't want to do interviews. Doesn't want to do anything. He wants to write songs and stay at home. So what he does is he seeks out this unreliable narrator, which literature uses all the time. And so the person who's singing the song is never him. It's always a character he's picked to portray the evilness in the song. And in Rednecks, for instance, rather than saying segregation is bad, segregation is terrible, he puts a redneck speaking about it, and he thinks the absurdity of his words are message enough, So, but after that unreliable narrator, yes, that hit him from the thing. His brother, Alan, says he can see something of Randy in almost every song, I can't. It just fascinates me so much. Now, Randy, I was getting very frustrated because I wasn't getting the stuff about his personal, because I wanted to know what motivated these songs. Why did he pick this path to go on? And when I would ask him about this, I could see him leaning back at the table. He wasn't comfortable. And I kept asking him, though, I thought it was a fair question. I didn't think I was being nasty. And he could get angry a couple of times. Why do you keep pushing me into this thing? And then one day I was about 2/3 done with the book and worried about finding that. He says to me very casually, are you going to talk to the kids? And I said, I think, I've talked to rock star kids before. They never say anything. They say hello, because rock stars don't want you talking to their family. The family can tell you things that blow their image and so forth, and the family's uncomfortable. And so I told Randy, I'll talk to him, sure. And I thought I'd shake hands with him, But the first one was Eric, and he started talking as frankly, as honestly, as forthrightly, as deep as anything you can imagine. He was telling me everything I wanted to know about Randy. And the second son told me the same thing in different ways, and the third, and the fourth, and the daughter. And it would have been terrible if one of them said Randy is X, one said Randy is, but they all said Randy is the same person. And his wife, Gretchen, was incredible. She said the same thing. So the thing about Randy, and I use this in the book, is he's not afraid of the truth as long as someone else is saying it, And Lenny, so those people really told me the heart of the book, more than Randy. Randy talked about the songs and gives occasional things, and he's trying his best, but he's working against 40 years of that don't reveal yourself. And finally, there was an interview the New York Times did. It was a double-page spread, and we talked to Randy and me. And the guy asked, he says, were you uncomfortable with the book? He says, well, it was difficult at times, but there's nothing that embarrasses me,
My entry, Randy Newman album, is Land of Dreams. He starts
Land of Dreams.
It is 88. Yeah.
Whoa.
I know. Well,
this is 68.
I know.
72.
I have to start somewhere. The first 3 songs are like biography. He's telling the story about him, and then he abandons it. Like, never mind. What I was talking about, it's.
Well, the funny thing, Dave, too, is that in interviews he kept saying, I don't usually talk about myself, but I've got this, there's some things I'm going to tell about myself in this new album. So when it comes out, because the first couple and 3 are, people think the whole thing is a concept album. They don't notice that he leaves the place. And I asked him, why'd you leave? He says, look, that brought me to my teen years, and I can't think of anything more to say about a teenager than being said. So he looks to other things, but it's so funny. It's still called his most autobiographical work when, it's only 3 songs that are autobiographical. And that was important because after he did Short People, I think the album went to 600,000 or 700,000. It was not a huge hit. So he said, let's have a joke. And he dresses up in Kiss makeup and dollar signs. And his fans didn't know what to make of it, okay? Yeah. And a lot of them, now he's selling out. They were afraid he was going to try to pocket the success of Short People. And others said, he's putting down rock and roll as this business thing. So there was a lot of backlash against the album. 100,000 people, maybe more, brought the record back to the record store. I thought it was going to be a comedy album. I don't want this. So that was a very confusing spot for him. So he says, I'm going to make a joke of it. I'm going to dress up as a businessman and be on the cover. And he thinks my fans will get the joke, but his fans didn't. They turned off him, and critics started knocking him for the first time. And he realized it was a mistake, but he saw it as a joke. It was a mistake. He doesn't regret it, but it's a mistake.
Yeah. And I should clarify that Land of Dreams, that's the first album. Like I knew Short People and I liked these, I became familiar with, but like Short People, I think was probably played on Dr. Demento. That's probably when I heard it as a kid.
Yeah, that's what when his son heard it the first time, he said, that's what we usually hear on Dr. Demento.
Yeah. ELO was my first favorite band. And so he wrote about that, like, I couldn't tell, like, does he like ELO or does he not like?
A lot of people were confused by that too. And he says, no, I'm a fan of him. I was kind of making fun of American fans. They were mispronouncing this Birmingham, but he has had this problem consistently. He'll write a song and it's so hard to figure out that theme because he has such subtlety and such sophistication. One of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard is called A Real Emotional Girl. And I think it's the most beautiful love song. Art Garfunkel on his solo tour sang it and said, this is the best song I've ever sung that Paul Simon didn't write. and so I said, Randy, what a beautiful song that is. He said, well, it's not a love song. It's about the narrator telling secrets of the girl that he shouldn't tell. Who knows? I said, Randy, how is anyone going to figure that out? He says, look, I'm not trying to trick anybody, but that's the way I picture the song, and I'm not going to change it to hope that more people understand it. Either they get it or they don't. Again, I'm not trying to trick. I'm not trying to write. I don't want to write down. But and there's several songs. He's got a song about the flag later on, about patriotism and how important it is. Oh, God, love your country and all that kind of stuff. And he got all kind of attack from people saying blah, blah, blah. And he said, look, I'm not the guy. He says the song was a statement against patriotism in the sense of blind patriotism. That leads you into wars. It leads you into all kind of things. But I said, but again, why don't you change it? No, I keep my vision.
But because he's such a great orchestrator, he makes it so patriotic. Like you can't help but like, you want to stand up. And like,
and there's a song I hated he did called Mr. Sheep, which is saying, oh, look at that guy get off the train with his briefcase, oh, Mr. Sheep. He's putting down that kind of old. And I say, why waste your time on that, Randy? He says, I'm not. I'm attacking people who attack that person. Why doesn't a person have a right to get a job, have a home? There must be a dozen songs you don't understand what they are.
He's just unreliable. You can't trust this man is what we've learned.
But it's to him, it's a statement. And you always remember that's not him talking. It's usually attacking the subject he's talking about.
I think this was in response to Real Emotional Girl. He said, I never try to make a song obscure. It's not an intelligence test. I'm trying to communicate.
Trying to communicate my feeling about it. But again, well said, but 95% of the people aren't going to understand your feeling.
Yeah, wasn't it I listened to Don Henley give his Rock Hall induction speech.
Eloquent?
No, it was great, brilliant. But he mentioned like only Randy Newman can get thousands of people in Texas to sing Rednecks. Like it's a talent. It's crazy. And the other thing he's very self-critical. He did, I Think It's Gonna Rain Today. He performed that. And during his speech, he said, well, I kind of rushed through that. I hope I don't get kicked out for bad performance.
Self-deprecating because the uncles. Don't brag. Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't tell them your faults. Be self-deprecating. So again, that's all that uncle stuff he inherited.
It's so crazy how you get those things from your parents or your relatives get in your head at an early age.
Because He loved Alfred Newman. My God, he would go see him on the soundstage doing that. His father loved Alfred Newman, so he was brought up as Alfred Newman was the ultimate artistic person. And Randy would be, when he was 8 years old, he would go watch Alfred, and Alfred would be, he couldn't understand. Alfred saying, "This is so hard. This is torturous. This is painful." He would be so nervous he would throw up before a concert. He would ask Randy, 8 years old, "Do you think this is any good?" And Randy said, "My God, how am I going to follow in that footsteps?" And that was another thing, that the intimidation that kept him before Lenny opened the door to pop music. And then finally he gets enough confidence. He goes back to film scores, and he does some great work. The Natural, Avalon, Parenthood, and then he does the great Toy Story. But looking at his overall career, despite some great highlights, he didn't get the assignments that he really wanted. He wanted more dramatic pictures. Out of Africa, he often talks about movies like that, but all he can do is things he's offered, and they look at him as a stereotype. He writes funny stuff. So he does The Leatherheads, that terrible movie, and he does Meet the Folkers and Maverick and stuff. These aren't things worthy of Randy's talent, but that's what he gets,
But Noah Baumbach.
And so being able to do Marriage Story, the latest one, was so important to him. That was what he wanted to do. And to think of if he had done movies like that his whole time, how much they would have lifted. I mean, he did fine. He got 20-something nominations for Oscars and stuff. When you look at it, The Natural and Avalon and 3 or 4 others really stand above all the rest of it. The animation, that's very good, but a lot of people don't see that as important as the other stuff. But he did wonderful stuff in the animation.
Well, you did tell the story about apparently money does matter to him at one point. It was Randy Newman who took out his wallet and pointed it out like, this song's going to be very good to you.
After John Lasseter plays him parts of Toy Story for the first time, that he pulls it out. This is going to be very nice to you, he says to his wallet. And I don't mean he wasn't against music, money, but he wasn't going to sell his musical soul to get more. But once he got Toy Story, he was getting $1 million a picture, I think.
Do you think he put the song Money That Matters? Mark Knopfler's on that, right?
He did one. He produced half of one album. It's Money That Matters, whatever album that was on. And it sounded just like Dire Straits.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's. Did he do that on purpose? Like that feels like another meta moment. Like this is the guy who wrote.
No, I don't think so. It's possible. That's interesting. I don't think so, though. I think it's just that they had the sound, Mark Knopfler's sound, and it just. I don't know quite what happened, but Mark Knopfler didn't do it. He said, "I didn't want this to be the single. I wanted some other song to be the single." Warner's is the one that put it out, and had the backlash. "Oh my God, he's selling out." And I don't know what Randy's thinking was on he liked the song, but I don't know about the arrangement and stuff. I don't know what Warner's wanted it that hit.
Yeah, sure. They want him. Yeah, sure.
Once they heard he was going to produce it, they said, "Oh my God,
we got Dire Straits.
Those guys are selling 5, 6, 10 million records."
Yeah.
He did a great job in the book portraying. It was like a complexity between his desire to write his music and taking on the soundtrack, doing the soundtracks. And whereas a lot of people, like a younger generation now, know him from the soundtracks.
Yeah. Well, no, it's like, I think he got married. He got second wife around that time. He had a couple more children, wonderful Patrick and Alice. And he had been struggling with the albums all this time. And I think this was a break. He could go back. First of all, he had the courage to do it. He said, "Let's try this." And it seemed to go well. It wasn't the torturous experience that the albums were, because once you give him an assignment, I want a song about friendship, he can write it overnight. It's not hard for him. And so it was an easier life doing the film than these banging your head against the wall to do these significant songs, he calls them. And then finally people say, well, I guess he's given up on that. But gradually, the frustration of not getting the film assignments he wanted, the money was attractive, the lifestyle was wonderful. Oh, and his second wife brought him out of his first wife. It wasn't his first wife's fault, but Randy, like most singer-songwriters, I bet, starting out, is 100% his attention devoted to those songs. And Randy said a couple times, the writing is more important than anything else, including my family. Whoa. Yeah. Early on he said that. But I think the heads of big companies, corporations, it takes time. And back in the 60s, the housewife, the wife was often the housewife. That was their role. But Randy would not come out to dinner. He wouldn't have dinner with his family. He wouldn't go on vacation. It was all focused. Now, see, if we switch to the later years with his second wife, his first wife said, don't let him do that. You got to get him involved. And I think partly was he had more success, but he started coming out to dinner. I've got a great picture in the book going on vacation. He's riding an elephant in Africa.
Yeah.
I mean, so his life was, that success and the film thing really helped broaden his life out. But then he realized, I want to go back and write those significant songs. That's what my legacy is. And then at the almost 60 years old, he did an album called Bad Love. Mm-hmm. And then after that, nearly 70, Harps and Angels. Then almost 80, he does
Dark Matter.
Yeah. And those are brilliant. I think those three stand aside, the first two stand aside, Good Old Boys and Sail Away, the same shelf. You can argue which is better. But and I've often think, Dave, what album, if someone said, I want a Randy Newman album, which one would you recommend they start with? That's a really hard question because they're all so different. Yeah. And I think it might be Dark Matter because it's got such a range. It's got such beautiful arrangements and orchestration, which he mastered doing those film scores. It's just a brilliant album and in different kinds of songs. Now, you might say Good Old Boys, and that's a good choice, too. It's very rare. I noticed as a critic, and it was always so known, after Pete Townsend, I Want to Die Before I Get Over This, not, after 30 or 40, it starts leveling off. Oh, yeah. The talent of these great songwriters we knew. So Randy and Paul Simon and Dylan, now they're all 80 or above, and they're all doing records that I would listen to in a minute if they made it,
Yeah. And I also saw Randy Newman at that show that you mentioned.
That was important. I don't know. I'm not sure most people realize how significant it was for the family, but it was just an amazing moment. It was 2017.
Something like that, yeah.
Randy had played the bowl before, but the great story of the Newman family is Alfred had two other sons. He had more than two, but two sons, David and Thomas, who also went into film scoring. And I think Thomas has gotten several Oscar nominations. I think David has at least one, but he's done maybe 100 more films, but they never particularly cross paths. I don't know why. And Randy's father, more than anything, he wanted to be a composer, and Alfred said, no, it's too risky, do something else. He wanted Randy to become part of that film thing so his part of the family could be reunited and be in the musical tradition, just like Alfred's sons. And that was pressure on Randy, see. And this night was the first time a member of the Alfred sons was with Randy on the same stage. David conducted the orchestra. And it was a wonderful night, just a wonderful night. For the book, I wanted to talk to both of them. And I couldn't get Thomas. I tried 2 or 3 times, and he was always tied up in a film. He was always doing this. And finally, he agrees to talk. So I go over and do an interview, and I'm suspecting there must be some tension here. So I walk in the room, and Thomas starts talking. And he talks for 20 minutes nonstop about how he loves Randy's music, how awed he is by him. Growing up, he wasn't intimidated by his father who had passed away like Randy was. He was intimidated by Randy. Randy, he says, he does things I couldn't imagine. Can you imagine trying to follow in his steps? I just couldn't, and it was a real struggle for him to get into film music. And the great thing was, at the end of the interview, he says, you know what? Randy is the greatest Newman of all. And I go, wow, because I thought that, but I didn't want to say it in the book because it looked maybe a little too much like I'm hyping it. But I said, you mean more than your dad? He says, yes, he's the greatest Newman of all. Isn't that great? Because my father could never write songs like that. Yeah. I mean, it was so sweet of him to say that. Yeah. But Thomas, both of those guys are just terrific. Yeah.
I could talk with you forever, really. I mean, I've been waiting 40 years to talk to you. So. All right, Holly.
Dave, we did it.
We did it. We had Robert Hilburn, LA Times critic from, the late 60s to the early aughts. the guy who helped form my musical opinions, the young buck. Was I a young buck?
You were a young buck back then, but he validated our musical opinions.
Yes, he did.
And sometimes he disagreed with us, or we disagreed with him. He was a huge influence, and I love how much he still loves to talk about the music.
I'm hoping to grow up to be him one day. I won't be as good a scribe as he is, but I will still hopefully have that passion for music, because he clearly still has that.
You're well on your way. You are well on your way.
I've heard that before as I'm escorted out of the building.
As we were standing there, we were making our way to exit with Robert, and there were more stories to be told. So we were getting stories every step of the way. And that's you. That could be you.
That could be me.
That very well could be you, but it's interesting for the person listening to the stories.
Yes, it is. It's a rare individual that is still interested in those stories. Clearly, if you're listening to this podcast, you are one of those people. So you found the right place. What Difference Does It Make is your place of choice. Where else can they find other things about What Difference Does It Make?
And thank you for that, making us your podcast of choice. Find us on social media at WDDIM Podcast and on our YouTube channel at What Difference Does It Make Podcast.
Very nice.
And thank you to Abiyayala Okendo at Grand Central Publishing, which is an imprint of Hachette Books, and Pantheon Podcast, as always.
Very nice. Yeah, it was wonderful to have a Valley Boy into our studio. And thank you to Randy Newman.
Thank you to Randy Newman for having such a big musical impact on our lives and the lives of our kids on his soundtracks for all those great films.
Yeah, tremendous. It's been doing the research for this, going back and listening to the music. It's amazing. So this 2013 Rock Hall inductee should be listened to continuously, and just always appreciated, because he is a wonderful, just amazing talent, and he's one of my favorites. So
I know he is, and you help me with a greater appreciation for him as well. And you can find something new. It's like you can always find something new when you're listening to him.
Yes, you can indeed. All right, well then let's wrap this up. I've got some more listening to do.
I've got eating.
Okay. All right, so until next time, this is Dave.
This is Holly.
Check you later.
Over and out.